Alright, happy Friday. We've got a couple of good questions this week. I'm going to go over a couple. So we've got best glute exercises to grow your peach, best ab exercises, and mum tum. I'm going to address the mum tum first because I think this is a really important thing. Mum tum needs to fuck off. You had a baby and the result of this is you may have stretched skin. This is a completely normal process and something that you should be fucking proud of and come to love. Like any kind of solution to this, maybe vitamin E might help your stretch marks. I say help, might change your stretch marks, but ultimately, like, this is something that I really think people need to understand, that you've had a baby, something that's grown inside of you, you should be fucking proud of that. So I'm gonna put that one to bed. Second one, the best glute exercise, right? This is gonna piss a few people off because people really like this exercise, but I'll go over the two things that I see people doing, not incorrectly, but just not optimal for growing your peach. The first one is heavy barbell glute bridges. They're a good exercise, but they're not a good exercise for what people think they do. So a heavy barbell glute bridge brings our hip into extension. So I'm using a pelvis model to demonstrate this. So the whole idea of a heavy barbell hip thrust, this is our pelvis here, is we're in this position and we, I'll this one out of the way, and we push our hips up. So the technical terms for this, we're trying to approximate the ischial tuberosity here. So we're trying to make this part and the greater trochanter of our femur come together. So we set them up, separate them up, and then push our hips up to make these two bones come together. Now, the problem with the barbell hip thrust is it places the bar directly over this joint. And I don't care how strong you are, whether you can shift 200 kilos on it, whether you can shift 400 kilos on it, there is no way, or it doesn't take a lot of load to disrupt this joint. By placing the barbell directly over here, we're never going to get these two bones to actually come closer because there's a physical bar pushing down here. So you may be getting into some degree of hip extension, but you're not getting into full hip extension. And the whole idea of a barbell hip thrust is that it puts us in full hip extension. It's the shortened position of a glute. So that out of the way with, that doesn't mean that a barbell hip thrust is a poor exercise. It's just maybe not the best choice to be loaded. A single leg hip thrust or a body weight hip thrust, excellent exercises. Run through a full range, you can run through a good range, but a barbell hip thrust, it's usually just too heavy to actually perform the exercise how it's intended to. But it does allow good room for what's called progressive overload, which means you can put more weight onto a bar, which is an exceptional growth factor or growth accelerator. The second thing is fucking bands around the knees. Now this has been debunked over and over and over again. Bands around the knees and side steps for your glute, or your peach, works your glute med, which is like the muscle on the side rather than on the back. We have a glute max and glute med. I'm not going to touch glute minimus and glute medius. And yes, you feel it burn, but in the same sense that when I walk up a flight of 50 stairs, I feel my quads burn. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the best exercise to grow my quads. So in the same sense, it burns, it hurts, you feel it. That doesn't mean that it's going to progress your actual muscle into a growth situation. It doesn't provide progressive overload. It doesn't allow you to increase the weight or the time under tension for that muscle in a linear fashion. It's just kind of like, oh, I can feel it going on, oh, it burns. So those two things instantly I kind of throw in the bin. They're not exercises that I would choose to put in for a purely peach program. And what I would do is look at the muscle actions of the glute. So we've got hip extension, which we talked about, is pushing our hips forward. So I extend into this position. That's the responsibility of my glutes. My glute max will push my hips forward. I've got external rotation, which does this. So it turns my femur head out and in. And that's the role of your glute medius and posterior fibers of glute medius. And I've also got some degree of internal rotation, which the anterior fibers of my glute medius do. And they're the main roles of the glute. So when I'm looking at exercise, or one exercise that's going to really do all of those things in a very proficient way, the first thing that comes to mind is sprints. Now I know that might sound weird, but if you look on any track athlete that sprints, they have fucking phenomenal glute development because it runs through the full range of motion. As I stand, I land in an externally rotated position, I go through internal rotation, then I come back into external rotation. So I'm running through the full like rotation aspect of it. And then I've also, in order to push off, have to push my leg behind me. So that's the glute max working for you there. So if I'm to think of one single exercise, although sprints are great, they again don't really allow for progressive overload. Like, yes, you could run faster or you could run for longer, but you're not really adding weight to an exercise. And when you do add weight to a sprint, it changes the mechanics so much that you're not really targeting the same muscle groups that we would anymore. So when I think of one exercise to put all of these pieces together, I'll probably have to demo this, so I might move us along. I think of a single leg, split stance, RDL to tackle my hip extension, and then I'm also going to add a rotation element into it. So I'll probably hold a dumbbell in my opposite hand and rotate into that. And then as I'm coming up, keep this dumbbell planted, or not planted, over my foot the whole time and rotate my torso. And that's allowing us to go through internal and external rotation. So we're actually working through hip extension and internal and external rotation at the same time. Now the cues for this would be to stay on the inside edge of my foot so that I can really find the corner of that glute, so that when I drop my hip down and put myself into this lateral hip shift or right hip shift, I really feel the stretch in my glute. And then as I'm coming up, I'm working through external rotation and squeezing through that. A bit of a complicated exercise, but honestly, I've done 2 reps there and I can feel my glute doing like working. So you don't need a lot of weight for that. But if anybody needs any help, drop me a message and I'll send you a video on how to perform this exercise properly and how to get into things. But that would be my number 1 glute exercise. I would probably also band around the hip to pull me backwards. Now, not a heavy band, because we'll run into the same problem that we ran into with the barbell hip thrust, where I'll pull my hips back even though I'm trying to hit hip extension. But seeing as I'm coming to the top here, gravity is no longer playing quite as big a role as it is here. So I want some kind of force vector to pull my hips backwards to fight against in that top position, just to push my hips forward. So yeah, I would probably have a very light band just to play the role of gravity during the very peak end of hip extension and work through internal and external rotation for one exercise. Ideally, I'd probably have 2 or 3 exercises that target external rotation, that targets hip extension, that targets our ability to push a hip forward, etc, etc, etc. So I would probably go through 2 or 3, but if I was to pick one, that would be the exercise. Single leg, RDL with a right hip shift and a band around your hip. Right, cool. Best ab exercise. Well, it's not ab exercise, as somebody said, best core exercise. Right, so I'm gonna not blow your mind here, but I'm gonna change your opinion of core. Most people think core, they think abs, and that's great. That is correct, but it's only half of the equation. So when I think core, what I think of is skeleton. You think of is your axial skeleton, the bit down the middle. So pelvis, thorax, skull. This is all core. Ab exercises are fantastic for controlling the thorax, but it misses the second half, which is control of the pelvis, which would all be done by the hamstring. Again, if we think about what this does, what's going on with the pelvis, the hamstring is going to play a role in hip extension, so it's going to bring the greater trochanter of the femur closer to the ischial tuberosity. Hamstring's going to assist in that. So if I want to have control of my core, I need to have super control of my hamstrings to help me like pull this down. Otherwise, we see a lot of people when they do a core exercise, they end up with their spine kind of tilted forward and they dump their pelvis forward into what's called anterior pelvic tilt. If you don't have control of your hamstrings, they're going to pull this back along with your glutes to keep that static, so that when we're doing a core exercise, this isn't moving as well. when we do a ab exercise, this is a movement as well, we only want the muscle that's working to work and everything else to stay perfectly still. So I think of core exercises, I don't think of like, oh, how to build a six-pack. Your six-pack's already there, that's just the shape of the muscles. What I think of is how can I control my axial skeleton to make sure that nothing's accidentally moving. And we can do this through respiration and breathing. So hamstring work will control your pelvis. Ab work, or rather, ab work is more done through respiration and breathing. So when I do a big forced exhale, if I go, my external obliques immediately kick on, and that's going to pin my ribs down, and that keeps me there. During any exercise, if I've got these ribs pinned down, I've got better leverage to work my core and better leverage to work any other exercise. So if I'm doing a bench press and I make a big exhale, that's now a core exercise. I'm demonstrating control over the core, I'm demonstrating control over my thorax, which requires core or abs. So we've got core exercises for the pelvis, core hamstrings, core exercises for the pelvis, and core exercises for the thorax. Anytime you have to keep your rib cage still will be a core exercise. Direct ab work, yes, you can do it, totally fine. Knock yourself out with sit-ups, crunches, whatever the fuck you want to do. But core is foundationally and structurally control. So these are our control patterns. I hope that sort of answers the question. It doesn't really, because it isn't the best exercise, because literally every single exercise that you do now should have some level of core engagement. So if we're doing a seated chest press, I want to get my hamstrings on first, then my core on my abs on, and then I can bench press. Otherwise I end up in this position and pressing. And this is now just a stretched position. I've got no control over my thorax here. I just let my ribs go and pop up. And you see it all the time with chest flies and dumbbell bench and shoulder press in particular. People will go down and go and pop their chest up, lacking control of their thorax to keep this down. So before every exercise, it's literally a big exhale, get my core on, and then move through an exercise, so that I'm not getting this blowout, this pop up, or this fucking break in what should essentially be a chest exercise. We turn it into a core exercise by turning these on and keeping them on. So yeah, what I'm trying to get at here is core should be involved in every single exercise you do. If you're bench pressing, you should feel hamstrings and abs as well as the target muscle. If we're shoulder pressing, we should feel hamstrings and abs as well as the target muscle, because these are the muscles that are going to control our axial skeleton and allow things to move. If other things move, I've now got this weak, unstructured position that is a very poor foundation to press off. I want to be fucking locked in and then press, etc., etc., etc. That's a pretty quick one. I only have the 3 exercises. Oh, Happy said, how's Bagel? Bagel's really good. I love him. But that's a pretty quick one. I have the 3 exercises this week, but best glute exercise is a doozy to get around. I would definitely give that a shout. And if you don't know how to set it up, either approach me in the gym and ask, or drop me a message and we'll figure it out.